all year long, people who follow Nintendo news have been discussing whether or not Nintendo is going to be able to hit this, what a lot of people say is a long shot of selling 20 million Nintendo Switch units in fiscal year 2018. Which, just if you don't regularly listen to the show, I will remind you that fiscal year 2018 for Nintendo starts on April 1st of 2018 and goes until March 31st of 2019. Okay, so keeping that in mind, Nintendo had, like, Mr. Kimishima, who took over as the president of Nintendo when Mr. Iwata died. He had made a statement that they had expected to sell 20 million consoles in one fiscal year, which is, most people would say that's unrealistic. That's, kind of shooting for the moon and kind of crazy. That being said, it looks like it's possible that they might actually pull it off. And the reason why people are saying so is because some analysts are basically saying that they think Nintendo sold more than 10 million Nintendo Switch units between October and December, which is a really crazy number. I mean, if you look at the Switch units that were pushed previous to that, it was not an impressive number, especially if you look back at the previous fiscal year. Just Nintendo was selling Switch after Switch after Switch. And then in 2018, from April to October, the Switch just really wasn't moving as fast as people thought it needed to in order to hit that goal. That goal being 20 million in one fiscal year. So, sorry, I was muting my Amazon device. So a lot of people, myself included, were skeptical that Nintendo could hit this number of 20 million in one fiscal year, and now it seems like they've planned out their year pretty well. I know that they were depending on some stuff that comes late in the year to buoy their sales because the beginning of the year was a little lackluster. But 10 million units in one quarter is really crazy. That's an insane number. And keep in mind, this is speculation by analysts, so this is not coming from Nintendo. We don't know if they actually sold that much, but if they did, that would be really, really impressive. Let's look at the games that may have pushed that. So starting in October, we had Super Mario Party, which sold really, really well. I mean, I think a few episodes back, I looked at the top-selling Amazon games of 2018, and Mario Party was on there, which surprised me because I didn't really, it didn't latch on to me the way that I thought it would. And like most of my family, we sat down and played it once, and we just didn't love it. But it looks like a lot of other people did. And I still say that game would have done better had they included full online functionality instead of just the partial online functionality that they did include. Then in November, so that was October. Then in November they brought in a big hitter. We're talking Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu, Pokemon Let's Go Eevee. Those games, I think, were like their number 8 and 9 most played games on the Nintendo Switch, according to Nintendo of Europe. If you look back a couple episodes, I think I talked about that, which is a really crazy thing to happen, seeing as how the game came out in November. So that's pretty impressive as well. And then, of course, on December 3rd, we had Super Smash Bros. Ultimate launch. Everything all year was kind of leading up to this. Nintendo really hammered it home in E3 this year. And at the end of the day, I think a combination of those three games plus the ridiculously strong catalog that the Nintendo Switch has, like the indie catalog, not to mention the fantastic games that came out the first year, meant that Nintendo Switch was really rolling off the shelves. I mean, I remember talking about it either maybe the first episode of this year or one of the last episodes of last year. The fact that the Nintendo Switch was Amazon's number one item sold in December, I think in 2018, or maybe it was just in gaming. I can't remember because it was a while ago. But the Switch has really been doing a good job selling really, really well. And I think that maybe Nintendo's going to hit this mark. Speaking of kind of businessy stuff, Mr. Furukawa, who took over for Mr. Kimishima back right before E3 happened. He's a very young guy. He's been working at Nintendo for a long time, but he's pretty young when compared with Mr. Kimishima. He has said multiple times that he foresees that it's very important for Nintendo in order to stabilize their the way that their revenue kind of comes in fits and starts. He's basically said that one way to do that is to make more smartphone games or more mobile apps. And he was recently talking to Kyoto News, and they were interviewing him. And one thing that he said is that he plans on having Nintendo continue to release 2 to 3 smartphone apps annually. So if you go back and look at what Nintendo has done in the past, a lot of times what they've done is they've had multiple anchors to kind of stabilize their business. So they would have a console, and then they would have a portable console. And the great thing about that is that whenever one started to kind of flounder, the other kind of saved them. A perfect example of this would be during the Wii U era. The 3DS was just selling like crazy, and because it was selling so well, Nintendo was able to just keep going, put their heads down, and end up giving us the Switch. And honestly, if the 3DS didn't exist to allow Nintendo to do that, we might not have the Switch now. They might have been in the negative far too often, and it might have caused them to fold up shop or something. Who knows what would have happened. But they had that extra anchor to help stabilize the business. Well, it looks like what Nintendo's doing is they're going back to a 3 anchor system. So they've got their home console business. In the past, they had the home console business, they had the Game Boy line, and then they had the DS line. This is back when the DS first came out, and Nintendo basically said, these are our 3 pillars that hold up the tent, basically. Of course, the DS caught on. It got really popular because it was so damn awesome, and Nintendo said, okay, the Game Boy line is dead. Move forward. Now we've got home console business, we've got the DS business, and then they bring in the 3DS business. And as you keep moving forward, those 3 pillars always kind of shuffle around. The home console's always there, but now it looks like they're moving towards another 3 pillar or 3 anchor, depending on what metaphor you want to use, but a 3 pillar business. Of course, there's the home console. Although, there's rumors that Nintendo is getting out of there because Mr. Furukawa said that, they have to be flexible. But there's the home console business. And now there's the mobile business. And even though I'm one of those people who, when the Switch was coming out, I said Nintendo needs to drop the 3DS like it's hot, they have clearly shown that those of us that had that opinion, and that includes me, we were definitely wrong about that. Because last year, Nintendo had one of the best 3DS years that they've ever had as far as sales. And my main reason for not wanting Nintendo to focus on the 3DS as their 3rd pillar or 2nd pillar, if you want to count mobile as the 2nd, even though I think the mobile arm of the company is making more money than the 3DS arm of the company. The reason why I wanted them to stop with the 3DS is so that they could funnel all of their resources, all of their game development into Nintendo Switch stuff. That way they weren't splitting their teams up. And they actually kind of did this back under Mr. Iwata. If you go back quite a long time, Mr. Iwata had basically restructured the company. They had a portable division, and then they had the home console division, and those two were pretty much separated, and they didn't really mix together. Okay, and because they didn't mix together, that meant that basically Nintendo could put out games on the 3DS, or they could put out games on, in this case, the Wii U back then, but putting out a game that would run on both wasn't something that would usually happen because the two sections of the company, they weren't really working together. Mr. Iwata, I think he foresaw what was happening, and he even had like a press conference at some point, and this is all from memory, so I could be getting part of this wrong, but he said, I want everybody to think of the NX. This is back before it was announced that it was the Switch. He said, I want everybody to think of the NX as more of a family of systems that we can develop for. And at that point, he also, basically, this was when Nintendo was deciding to make mobile games. And Mr. Iwata, he looked at the landscape and said, if we don't tell them, the gamers out there, if we don't tell them that we are working on a new home console and we put out a mobile game, they're going to freak out. So we have to make sure that when we tell them that we're working on a mobile game, that they understand that, don't worry, we're not ditching the home console business. So he told us about the NX and how the NX was this family of systems. And a lot of people, myself included, were like, what does that really mean? And I think it's just like this year where we're starting to see the fruits of this labor. I mean, of course, they are different systems, but there have been games that have come out for both. Games that have come out on the new Nintendo 3DS XL and games that have come out on the Nintendo Switch. And it gives Nintendo multiple price points to sell things to. So I don't think Nintendo has been diverting very much resources from the Nintendo Switch stuff into the 3DS stuff. And of course, I mean, we didn't get a lot of games on the 3DS, but Mr. Furukawa, in that same interview that I was talking about earlier, he basically said that the 3DS isn't going anywhere. We're not going to discontinue it. It can coexist with the Switch. And what it basically allows them to do is it allows them to have a foothold in a very low price point. You go to Xbox or PlayStation, the minimum that you're spending is probably $200, I think. If you want to get a Nintendo gaming system, the minimum that you're spending is like $80 for a 2DS, and that comes with Mario Kart. Mario Kart 7, like one of the best-selling Mario Karts of all time. One of the best-selling games of all time. Like it sold like crazy, and it was super fun. It was a really great game. Having that $80 price point and having it come with a game means that very early on, kids associate Nintendo and Nintendo's IP with video games. It almost takes me back to when I was a kid, and no matter what I was playing, my parents said, "Oh, you're playing Nintendo." Like they didn't. It was kind of like the Kleenex to the tissues, Nintendo to video games. You know what I mean? So Nintendo having that very, very low barrier to entry of $80 means that that's going to grow Nintendo fans in the future. And as long as Nintendo continues to do what they've been doing all year long, where they've, slowly dribbling out stuff for the 3DS and letting it just kind of live on its ridiculously large back catalog that goes all the way back to the first DS system. I think that that's a winning strategy. And I don't think, and this is a change for me, because I now fully, I admit that I was wrong on this. I don't think keeping the 3DS around was a mistake on Nintendo's part. I think that at the end of the day, they've done a smart thing with that, and they've handled it really, really well. It didn't take anything away from the Switch, and it looks like the Switch might actually hit that 20 million units sold in one fiscal year, which would be a crazy number. So Nintendo is a 3-pillar company again. The home console business with their crazy sales, the 3DS, and they had a huge year for 3DS sales last year, and then their mobile games, games like Fire Emblem Heroes, that is just making them money hand over fist. So I think Nintendo has they've done a good job in this year, and we don't have much longer to wait before we find out exactly how well they did.